Thank you for including pediatrics in this symposium. I think pediatric care is delivered really differently than adult care, with a lot of care delivered at specialized tertiary or quaternary centers, and so I think it's great that we're addressing this here. Sorry. Okay, I have no disclosures. So CAR-T has really transformed the landscape of how we treat relapsed or refractory B-cell ALL, not only with regards to disease efficacy, but has a more favorable toxicity profile. And as a result, has shown to have an improvement in patient quality of life. And CAR has the potential to mitigate existing disparities that already exist in pediatric oncology. So not only with regards to high-risk cytogenetic features, but also some studies have shown that among children who successfully receive CAR-T therapy, there are similar complete remission and overall survival rates, despite differences in socioeconomic status and ethnicity. And unlike something like oral maintenance chemotherapy, where adherence is a concern, CAR-T can deliver these results usually with a single infusion, and so access is really a key piece of the puzzle. As we go through this, I'm just going to have you think about this case. So JB is a 12-year-old male who lives in a suburb outside of Anchorage, Alaska, with his mother, father, and 3 siblings. His father works 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off on the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, so he is away from home during those times. JB is diagnosed with high-risk B-ALL and receives his upfront pediatric oncology care in Anchorage. Unfortunately, his course is complicated by several infections and chemotherapy toxicities. And then he has refractory disease with 7% disease at the end of induction and 1.2% at the end of augmented consolidation. So his oncologist considers CAR-T cells, but thinks about his family and social situation in doing so. And CAR-T has its own unique challenges because it is only available at limited specialized sites. Kymriah is the only FDA-approved CAR-T cell therapy in pediatrics, and this is a map of Kymriah centers here. And it looks like I actually cut Alaska off here, but there is a wide range. Alaska does not have a Kymriah center for pediatrics, and there's other areas in the country where patients still have to travel far distances to get to a center. So you can think about, for someone like our case, JB, like traveling to and from Seattle for collection and then infusion again really would require a lot of resources. And since this is the only commercial product, a lot of patients seek out CAR-T products on clinical trials, and those sites are even more limited, so often require travel and temporary relocation by families. So access barriers exist at every level from along the referral to infusion continuum, but does result in this funnel of eligible patients versus those who can actually receive CAR-Ts there at the bottom. And this disproportionately affects vulnerable populations. This has been shown in several studies. So among children treated on CAR-T clinical trials, children who are Hispanic, Black, and Spanish-speaking are underrepresented. Children with public insurance are less likely to receive CAR-T therapies. In a study out of the Pediatric Real-World CAR Consortium, Black children were more heavily pretreated prior to T-cell collection, suggesting a delay in referral, and were also disproportionately represented among the non-infused patients. And children from more advantaged households are able to receive CAR-T with higher disease burden and more likely to receive CAR-T despite living further away from a center. Providers can play a key role in the referral process, but decisions aren't always clinical. And this has been shown in the allo transplant literature, where oncologists have cited that they are less likely to refer patients who lack insurance coverage or social support. And referral to CAR-T requires awareness on behalf of providers about available products and trials, the eligibility criteria, and then having the time and resources to refer. So we did a mixed method study of pediatric oncologists through the UO1-funded Consortium for Pediatric Cellular Immunotherapy, which includes these 5 sites you can see here, which are all leading pediatric CAR-T referral centers. And despite nearly 80% indicating familiarity with CAR-T and feeling comfortable providing information on CAR-T to families, almost a quarter estimated that fewer than half of eligible patients were referred for CAR-T. And there's some practice variation. There's no one true gold standard for how you treat relapsed B-ALL, so we also asked oncologists why they decided to refer. And we found that socioeconomic factors influence referral patterns. So 38% of them considered non-clinical factors significantly influential in their decision to refer. And this included compliance or adherence concerns, family social support, family resources, insurance status, language or cultural barriers, education, and patient race or ethnicity. So we did some interviews with a subset of these providers, and as you can imagine, people mentioned time away from home, financial stressors, but a few oncologists also mentioned the concern for long-term impacts, with one oncologist saying, I worry more about a year down the road. We can pay an electric bill or a mortgage payment, but we can only do that so many times. For somebody that has relapsed disease, you're chewing up a lot of resources. And it's true, families of children with cancer have added chronic stressors from financial stressors, both during and after therapy. But even if well-intentioned, making referral decisions based on socioeconomic factors can worsen existing disparities. So how do we improve referral for CAR-T? Another theme that came out is having the value of having an established partnership with a CAR-T center, not only for the ease of logistics and care coordination, as you can see in these top two quotes here, just talking about the care coordination being easier and the CAR-T center being able to coordinate everything for them, but also a valued second opinion. So with some smaller sites saying we're very dependent on the CAR center to say we should go to transplant or we should do CAR-T cells and then transplant. And so in that vein, can we set up some more formal partnerships like hub and spoke models or shared care models to kind of help delineate these and not make it an uncertain process for these referring institutions? The field of CAR-T is always evolving, and so I think ongoing physician education is necessary. The Access Initiative is a joint ASCCT and NMDP collaboration, and they have these case-based community physician exchange events, largely focused on adult oncologists right now, but to try to think about how can you timely refer patients and what can you think about ahead of time. And then early social work support from the CAR-T center can help. I think larger CAR centers have more robust infrastructure in place to help support these families, and so should be looped into the process early. Publicly insured patients are less likely to receive CAR-T cells, and so the Access Initiative did a Medicaid scan to look at coverage of CAR-T. In this picture, you can see that there is dark blue is reasonable coverage, the light blue is prior therapy exclusions, and then there's this wide swath of like tan, where there are no coverage policies, and might make sense because CAR-T therapies are newer, but does lead to uncertainty whether or not these therapies are going to be covered. And even the prior therapy exclusions don't tend to make sense with how we clinically treat patients. The scan also looked at coverage of ancillary costs, such as lodging and meals for Medicaid beneficiaries and their caregivers. And a lot of states had unrestricted coverage, but some had these per diem limits, when if you think about where CAR-T centers tend to be located in large metropolitan areas, might not be reasonable for what they've listed here. And then for families who have low financial reserve, having to pay these out-of-pocket costs and then wait for reimbursement can also be really prohibitive. And so the NMDP is doing advocacy outreach to specific state Medicaid offices to try to align coverage with current care standards and to support out-of-pocket costs. And then I think at the institution level, just streamlining insurance authorization to make this as easy as possible, and then social work support. These costs can be more significant for patients that live further away from a CAR-T center, and we know that proximity does impact access. And so, fortunately, the number of CAR-T centers is only growing. FACT now has community IEC standards to try to support that accreditation process for smaller centers, and the FDA has scaled back REMS requirements to try to make this easier. And then, in thinking about clinical trials, too, can CAR centers partner with local institutions for some of the follow-up evaluations? Can we reduce the number of times that patients have to come out to a trial site? I just saw a patient in clinic this week from North Carolina who's here for a CAR-T infusion in Seattle and had come out 4 weeks ago for collection despite already receiving his primary oncology care at a FACT-accredited center. Can we try to figure out how to collect these patients closer to them rather than have them come out multiple times? And then one thing that I think probably deserves its own session is that our access in pediatrics is really limited by the lack of products. And so many promising academic cell therapies who have promising initial studies don't have follow-up registration studies and fall into this valley of death that you can see here on the right. And it's challenging to partner with industry for pediatric indications because these therapies are expensive to develop. By nature of pediatrics, pediatric indications are considered these rare diseases and sometimes are not perceived to offer the same return of investment. Addressing this is going to take multi-stakeholder collaboration and consensus, but some ideas that have been proposed are new regulatory pathways. So thinking about, can we work to have financial coverage of investigational cell therapies that have already shown promising efficacy and safety in a sort of expanded access model, and I think in parallel to what is currently done for device development? Or do we need a whole new entity, something that has been suggested as the Pediatric Advanced Medicines Biotech, which would spearhead the development and commercialization of pediatric cell and gene therapies? And then finally, one other theme that came out of the interviews that I mentioned earlier is that physicians felt like there were no insurmountable barriers for their patients. One person said, families make it happen. Despite what happens after that, families make it happen. And they probably do. I think families would do anything for a child with cancer. But I think we ask too much of them to make that happen. I think it's this patchwork system, and families often can fall through the cracks. And so really, if we have these amazing therapies, it's our job to be able to deliver them to all families in need, because for some, the barriers are insurmountable. And I think that's it for me.